Now, before I talk about the most important lesson in all of martial arts, I want to address what I call the 4 pillars of martial arts training. Now, typically, I call them the 4 pillars. I used to conflate 2 of the pillars so that I could call them the 3 pillars because a 3-legged table does not wobble. But I have learned that things that wobble can be more stable than things that don't. But the 4 pillars of martial arts training in this case are technique, method, conditioning, and the mind. Technique, of course, is what you do. Martial techniques like punches and kicks and joint locks and throws and pushing and pulling and pressure point manipulation, grappling techniques, etc. There are also weapon techniques like stabbing and slashing and hacking and shooting and barrage, etc. There are even verbal and psychological techniques like, does your mother know you go out dressed like that? And, oh look, it's an obvious distraction. Or, oh my. These are called techniques. Now, the decision as to what technique you are going to use at a particular time, this is called tactics. Your tactics will depend on your awareness of the situation and how effective you are at making certain techniques work when it matters. Lots of people learn techniques but can't apply them very well. So this brings us to the 2nd pillar, which is methodology. If a technique is what you do, a method is how you do it. So the method is about the way that you use your mind and your body to affect the other person and yourself. This is how you make the technique work. How do you achieve and maintain a mechanical advantage in a changing situation? How do you adapt to changing force and changing resistance? How do you adjust to the opponent's changing positions and attitudes, both subtle and profound? Changes that happen in a fraction of a second, a decisecond or a centisecond. Now, making the techniques work will depend on your understanding of the laws of physics that are involved, and the psychology of the combatants, and the conditioning of the combatants, and the environment, the weather, and so on. But the method involves the way of transferring momentum, applying leverage, affecting the elasticity or plasticity, and various moduli. Anyway, never mind. We'll get to that another time. But it requires a subtle awareness and an understanding of the various vectors of things like force and velocity and angular momentum, as well as willpower, emotion, and intent. The thing about techniques is that it is not enough to just practice the technique itself. You must also practice making it work in a complex and adaptive situation. Some people say in a realistic situation, but realistic training is not practical, because a truly realistic situation is one which is inherently very dangerous, and which you don't often see coming. The risks of realistic situations are far greater than anyone should face in regular training. Years ago, I remember a fellow came into our school and he said, I need to learn how to fight as quickly as possible, and I don't have a lot of time. I need to learn how to fight now. And the teacher at the time directed him to a biker bar down on Queen Street in Toronto and told him to go there and start insulting the meanest people he could find. So that's the traditional, shall we say, Darwinian approach. Survival of the survivors. That is not for me. I would rather have the vaccine. Thank you very much. Now, choosing what method you are going to use is like strategy. This will depend on the tactics that are available to you, but it will also depend on your understanding of yourself and your opponent. And this brings us to the third pillar, which is conditioning. Conditioning, or just condition, if the techniques are about what you do, and the method is about how you do it, conditioning is about how you are. This describes the qualities of your vehicle, the body and the mind. This involves the nature and the structure of the body and the mind at any given point in time. Are you strong? Are you weak? Are you flexible or stiff? Are you agile or clumsy? Are you quick or slow? Are you balanced or tipsy? Are you calm or anxious? Are you relaxed or rigid? Do you have a lot of endurance? Or do you sweat when you eat? Are you motivated, and in what way? What is your physical and emotional state? That is what conditioning is about. Now, an internal stylist might ask, are you rooted? Meaning connected to the ground. Are you well aligned? Do you have centripetal engagement? Conditioning can involve inherent qualities. These are conditions that you cannot change. Sometimes you're born with them, sometimes they are things that develop over time. Are you tall or short? Are you old or young? Are you handsome or pretty? Are you lucid or not? Your inherent condition will inform the kinds of techniques and methods that you are able to apply, and the ones that are available to you at the time. See, many people will focus on learning and mastering specific techniques that suit their inherent condition. When they study a martial art, they will often study a martial art that suits their body type, their physical capabilities. But there are also acquired qualities. Martial artists have many different types of conditioning exercises. There are the really vigorous calisthenics, the so-called external exercises like knuckle push-ups and aerobics and acrobatics and iron body training, stretching, resistance training, etc. There are also the so-called internal meditative exercises, yoga-like exercises called Neidan or Neigong and Qigong. These internal training exercises condition the alignment of the body and mind. They change the way that the emotional and physical structure spontaneously responds to internal and external influences. And this brings us to the fourth pillar, the mind. So if techniques are what you do, method is how you do it, conditioning is how you are, and the mental training is also called essential training, meaning what you are. This has to do with your awareness and your actions, what your mind can absorb and what it can manifest. It also is how you define yourself in relationship to other people and to the situation at hand. How do you define yourself? It is said that if you know yourself and know your enemy, you will never be defeated. Of course, this means knowing yourself and your enemy better than they do. The needs of martial arts sort of begin and end with understanding what self-defense is. And that means understanding what the self is and what it means to defend it. If you don't understand the self and you don't understand what it means to defend the self, then you will end up fighting against yourself, inevitably, and you will be defending against things that are no threat to you. And you will just end up exacerbating the situation and lead yourself onto the path of more violence. It's very counterproductive. Real self-defense is what is called an infinite game. It has no beginning and no end. We improve our ability to defend ourselves by recognizing the nature of the conflict before it happens. This requires awareness, self-awareness, and awareness of the other. The punch that hits you is the one you did not see, or at least it's the punch that you do not remember. If I see the punch, it is too late to stop it. But I can mitigate the effect that it has on me if I have the awareness and the conditioning and a method of adapting my body to the situation in the precise moment that the punch hits me. But if I see the energy of the punch forming, then I can intercept the punch before it hits me. If I see the intent behind the punch, then I can prevent the punch. If I see the motivation behind the punch, then I can stop the attack before it manifests. If I can see the cause of the motivation, I can prevent the conflict that started it all. If I can see the shape and nature of my relationship with the world, then I can improve my chances of living a life of relative peace. This comes down to understanding how I define myself and my place in the world, and my ability or willingness to adapt to that definition and my awareness of myself in order to fit the situation. This is where meditation and education are important. Improving your self-awareness can change the world. At the very least, it can help you block a punch. It's an interesting term, self-defense. From one perspective, it implies that you are doing something to defend the self. The thing that you are defending, however, is the weapon that defends it. So this is more or less profound than it sounds, depending on how you read it. But think of an attack as some external force attempting to upset your balance and to disturb your harmony with the universe. And that force does it by pushing or throwing or tripping or by knocking you unconscious or by killing you. You want to defend your balance and your harmony with the universe. Well, the better you are at being balanced and harmonious, the easier it will be for you to defend that balance and that harmony. So the primary weapon is the very thing that you are meaning to defend. So the better your balance is and the more harmonious you are, the easier it will be for you to defend yourself. This applies at all levels and all stages of conflict, from the very origins of the battle itself to the actual techniques that are applied. This is always relevant throughout all phases of the conflict. The goal of a martial art is to have no enemy. This is not achieved through force of arms, but by force of virtue. Power buys respect, restraint of power buys admiration, but virtuous power buys allegiance. So being balanced, or being very good at balancing yourself, and being good at harmonizing with the world, well, this is what a martial art is. Now, different martial arts schools and teachers and students, they all have different approaches to these four pillars of martial arts. There are the technique-based approaches, the method-based approaches, the conditioning-based approaches, and the mind-based approaches. And there are fine examples of great martial artists from all of these different schools, but the best tend to be the most comprehensive. Those who consider all four pillars and train all of them and understand the importance of each stage in each part of the training. If you have a school that has a technique-based approach, then you will learn form and choreography and shapes. You learn the geometry of the martial art. You will learn a number of different techniques that are practiced in specific situations under specific scenarios. The opponent punches with a right lunge punch and you defend with this and do this and that happens. But these techniques won't work at first in a real situation. They'll only work in controlled situations. But with practice, you develop a method of making the technique work. If you've ever done a beginner's self-defense class, you may have learned the classic go ahead, grab my wrist technique. Where you say, grab my wrist. No, the other hand. Nope, no, palm down. Okay, now you're sore and it doesn't work. Hang on, stand, wait, just relax, let me do it. And so that's how it begins. You begin with learning the technique, and then later you learn the method. But when you have a technique-based approach, you will often find one or two techniques that suit you, where you don't have to learn much about methodology or do much conditioning for that technique to work. You will find some techniques that are easier to apply based on who you are, how you are built, your level of conditioning. And with practice, you will develop a way of making those techniques work better and better in more varied situations. But in order to avoid being predictable, you will need to learn more techniques and find more ways of doing them. And in order to make them work against different types of people, you will need to improve your methodology. And you'll deepen your conditioning and learn to understand yourself and your opponent better. So the technique-based approach starts with technique, develops method and conditioning and awareness on top of the technique, based on the technique. The other thing about technique is that techniques only work against someone who is cooperating with the technique. The method is about catching them when they are cooperating. We will say when they're not ready to defend, but essentially they are cooperating, or you're tricking them into cooperating. Some people are always cooperating because they lack any technique, method, conditioning, or awareness. But those are people that, well, you really shouldn't be fighting with them in the first place. You should be teaching them and empowering them. Now, the method-based school. If your school has a method-based approach, then they will be teaching the mechanics of movement and showing you different ways of moving efficiently and dealing with varying degrees of force on different vectors. And over time, you will begin to find different martial applications and techniques, but many of the exercises will be flowing drills with no particular beginning or ending. If you focus on method, then the techniques will be incidental. But you will probably find some techniques that just seem to happen over and over again because of the way you are built and who you are, and the kinds of people you are training with. The trap that you will fall into is thinking that you don't need to explore technique, or that your methods will work against people of all shapes and sizes and people with superior conditioning who use unexpected techniques. If your school focuses on conditioning, then you will spend most of your time doing exercises that make you stronger and faster and more flexible and more agile, more focused and more resilient. If you focus on quality, you will work to become flexible enough, strong enough, fast enough, coordinated enough, relaxed enough, and aware enough to be able to apply the method and the technique. If you are, then you will naturally be able to do things that the opponents cannot deal with. People with extraordinarily good conditioning may find that technique is irrelevant and the method is incidental. There was a time when I did so much standing meditation and pushing hands exercise and toisho and sticking and so on, that all I had to do was walk towards my opponent and they would fall down. The problem with this approach is that someone with a superior technique, method, and strategy and a little bit of conditioning will eventually come along and make you look foolish. So eventually you'll walk towards someone and say, oh, we've started already, and you get knocked out 3 times in 2 rounds and can't quite figure out what's going on. And then they knock you down 7 or 8 times, then you get smart. Another problem with the conditioning approach is that your skill lasts only as long as these qualities last. When you are old or injured, the skill disappears. If your martial art depends on you being the strongest and the fastest and the most flexible, then it will only appeal to people who are big and strong and flexible and fast. That is not much of a martial art. A superior martial art should work for people of all shapes and sizes. Now, awareness, the mind, your essential nature. What are you? How do you define your relationship with the world? Why is there a fight? If your school focuses on the mind and your essential nature, then you might do a lot of meditating, a lot of observing how thought, emotion, and posture and action are connected. You might study philosophy and psychology and sociology and physics and economics and politics and law. You might study conflict resolution through the local justice institute. The mind is the beginning and the ending of martial arts training. But to know your enemy and know yourself, this cannot be done by hating them. The process of learning to understand yourself and others is so intimidating that very few martial artists have the courage to face this kind of training. But to summarize, technique, method, conditioning, and understanding. All four are essential pillars. If you're missing one of these, you are missing a huge part of what martial arts can offer.
Congratulations on making it to the end of one of my videos. That is quite an accomplishment. If you would like to see more of these videos, then please visit sinclairinternal.arts.com, where you can make a one-time donation, or subscribe or sign up for a private online lesson. If you would like to see fewer of these videos, that is going to cost you.